A Sunday morning at Boulevard Kellerman, late in the year 1903. The breakfast table is set in the modest second-floor apartment where the family has lived since 1900 with old Dr. Eugène Curie in the rooms behind. Pierre stands in shirt sleeves at one end, his hand resting on a letter that has just arrived from engineers in Buffalo in the United States. Marie sits across from him, an uncapped pen near her coffee, the morning paper folded beside her cup. The patent question has just been masked, and the room waits for the answer. The patent, if granted, would secure them a worldwide right to the radium extraction process for 19 years. The discovery itself was barely 3 years old. The second Nobel announcement was only weeks away. Hold this room for a moment, because everything we will come back to in this hour begins with the question Pierre has just put on the table. Almost everyone knows the prizes. Almost everyone remembers that Marie Curie won the Nobel Prize twice, in 1903 with her husband, and again, alone in 1911. That the first American president to give her a gram of radium was Warren Harding in the East Room of the White House in May 1921. That she ran 20 radiological cars for the French army in the Great War. Almost no one knows that on a Sunday morning in late 1903, Pierre raised with Marie the question of a worldwide patent on the radium extraction process, the discovery that could have made them the richest family in France, and that Marie answered plainly. That evening, Pierre wrote to the engineers in Buffalo, offering the information freely. The Curies took no copyright on the work. This is the story of a woman who lived for the refusals and paid for them. Hold that phrase in mind. We will earn it together, slowly, over the next hour. Radium was not to enrich anyone. Radium is an element. It belongs to all people. Marie wrote that sentence on the crossing home on the White Star Liner Olympic in May 1921, a few days after the East Room ceremony. The gram the Americans had given her was in the purser's safe. The deed of gift had been redrawn by her lawyer the night before, and the radium legally belonged to her laboratory rather than to her heirs. We will meet her there at the close of this hour. For now, the long discipline begins. In a Warsaw schoolroom under Russian surveillance, in a Sorbonne sixth-floor attic, in a leaking wooden shed on the Rue Lomond, in a wartime voiture radiologique, in a sanatorium at Saint-Lemos, the hour will take its time. The radium, in the end, will pay for it. Chapter 1. Warsaw Attic. Before any of the prizes or the refusals, there is the city she was born into and the small choices it asked her to make. The substrate. Warsaw, under Tsarist occupation, in the long Russian attempt to erase the Polish language from its own schools, in the long shadow of the failed 1863 uprising, when Marie's parents were already grown. We start here, gently, because everything the legend later remembers grew out of this soil. Maria Sklodowska was born on 7 November 1867 in Warsaw, into a city that belonged, on paper, to the Russian Empire. Her father, Vladislav Sklodowski, was a professor of physics at a gymnasium on Novolipki Street, where he later defended a pupil against a Russian functionary, Ivanov, and lost his salary, his title, and his lodging in 1873. Her mother had run a girls' boarding school in Freda Street before her illness began. Marie was the youngest of the children, and small and serious, and the household already had a name for her. Manya, then Manusha, then Antipetio. From the start, the family lived inside a system that visited and surprised and required the right answers in the right language. Polish was the language at home. Russian was the language at school. The answer at any moment had to be the one an inspector would recognize. Marie's mother developed tuberculosis around the year of her birth and maintained the careful hygiene of a woman who knew what she carried. Separate dishes, no embraces. A nightly prayer was added for her health. In January 1876, the eldest sister, Zosia, died of typhus, caught from a boarder in the house. Marie was 9. In May 1878, her mother died of the same consumption she had been hiding for 11 years. The household was managed after that by a series of housekeepers. On 12 June 1883, Marie completed her secondary studies at the Krakowski Boulevard Gymnasium and was awarded a gold medal, the family's third. She had clashed repeatedly with the superintendent Mole Mayer over her curly hair, her expression, her bearing. The household temper was not yet pointed at the world. During country holidays, she joined the Kuliks, torchlight sleigh processions through the snow, masked dancers and Jewish fiddlers playing mazurkas and krakowiaks, the kind of brightness that an occupied city had learned to keep for itself. Around the year 1885, Mary, then about 17, made a pact with her elder sister Bronia. Bronia would go to Paris to study medicine using her own savings. Mary would work as a governess and send her sister money. Once Bronia had her medical degree, she would support Mary's studies in Paris. The arrangement was the discipline's first real test, deferral in the name of a future, half a salary each month for years. On 1 January 1886, 18-year-old Mary departed by train and sleigh for the Struki estate in the government of Plock, hired to teach Anzia and Branka at 500 rubles a year. The estate belonged to the Czartoryski princes. A factory chimney dominated the view. Sugar beet was the principal crop. By evening, with the help of Branka Z, she had begun an illegal Polish evening school for the children of estate workers and peasants. Her collaborators were warned, if we are denounced, we shall be sent to Siberia. By December 1886, the school had 18 pupils. Marie bought copybooks from her own salary. Mary fell in love with Casimir Z, the eldest son of her employers, who had returned from studies in Warsaw. His parents refused their consent because Mary was a governess. Casimir withdrew. She stayed at Struki to support her sister, sending 15 to 20 rubles a month, nearly half her salary, to Bronia in Paris. Silent loyalty under disappointment. During a brief return to Warsaw in 1890 and 1891, Marie worked evenings and Sundays at the Museum of Industry and Agriculture on 66 Krakowski Boulevard, run by her cousin Joseph Boguski as a clandestine venue for science instruction. The floating university, the Poles called it, because it moved when the Tsarist inspector moved. Marie's work there with test tubes and electrometers confirmed the vocation she had already half named for herself. This is how Marie, much later, set down the family in her own hand My family is of Polish origin, and my name is Marie Sklodowska. My father and mother both came from among the small Polish landed proprietors. My father, more strongly drawn to study, followed the course of the University of Petrograd, and later definitely established himself at Warsaw as professor of physics and mathematics in one of the lyceums of that city. Chapter 2. 40 rubles a month. In September 1891, Mary broke off her lingering attachment to Casimir Z, saying, "If you can't see a way to clear up our situation, it is not for me to teach it to you." She traveled by fourth-class German rail cars to Paris, where her sister Bronia and brother-in-law Casimir Dlusky had a flat near the Buttes-Chaumont Park. The next life began, with a budget of 40 rubles a month and a 6-flight walk to a 6th-floor attic. On 3 November 1891, Marie registered at the Faculty of Sciences of the Sorbonne under the name Marie Sklodowska. She enrolled in courses given by Appel, Lippmann, and Bauti, attending them in person rather than through correspondence. She reported in letters home that she had serious gaps in her French language preparation and in the mathematics of the French baccalaureate. She had studied the Russian system in Warsaw, and now the French one, in a country foreign to her on every axis that mattered. The institution was vast, the city was foreign, the budget was set, and the first day is to be remembered plainly. A young woman, alone, on the cobblestones of the Sorbonne's main courtyard, on the 3rd of November in the year 1891. Marie set herself a monthly budget of 40 rubles, 3 francs a day, which was to cover her room, her food, her books, her university fees, and her clothes. She rented a 6th-floor attic with no heating at 3 Rue Flatters. She rose at 6. She kept 1 or 2 sacks of coal for winter, hauled them up by the bucket, 6 flights of stairs, often in the dark. She often ate only buttered bread and tea, sometimes buttered bread and an egg. In the winter of 1892, she fainted in the attic. Brother-in-law, Casimir Dlusky, summoned by a Polish comrade, climbed 6 flights and found her plates empty save radish, tops, and cherries. He carried her down to the Dluskys' flat, where Bronia fed her underdone beefsteak. Marie returned to her attic and her diet the next morning. Marie wrote to Bronia plainly, "I am in Paris on 40 rubles a month, which is not enough." She did not complain. She named the number. 3 francs a day had to cover her room at 3 Rue Flatters, the food she ate, the books she bought, the university fees, and the clothes she mended and reused. The number carried a budget. The sentence carried the rest. Hold it for a moment. A young woman from a Polish physics family had crossed a continent on a 4th-class German rail ticket to live inside a sum that would have embarrassed a Sorbonne librarian, and the next year she would finish first in her physics cohort. In 1893, Marie completed the license as Sciences Physiques, finishing first in her examination cohort, ahead of every French student in her year. In 1894, she completed the license Yes, Sciences Mathematiques, finishing second. She received a fellowship from the Society for the Encouragement of National Industry to study the magnetic properties of steels. Her practical work was conducted in Lippmann's laboratory, where the apparatus and the room were already hers to use. The discipline started paying, the Sorbonne noticed, even if the budget had not. In the spring of 1894, the Freiburg physicist Joseph Kowalski, on honeymoon in Paris with his wife, suggested that Marie consult Pierre Curie about workspace for the magnetic steel study. The two met at a tea with the Kowalskis and immediately fell into extended technical discussion. Pierre noted Marie's competence. She noted his charm and his unusual detachment. Marie's own description, written years later, is the one to hold. Pierre Curie was standing in the recess of a French window opening on a balcony. He seemed to me very young, though he was at that time 35 years old. I was struck by the open expression of his face and by the slight suggestion of detachment in his whole attitude. His speech, rather slow and deliberate, his simplicity and his smile, at once grave and youthful, inspired confidence. She was 26, he was 35. They were within 9 years of each other. In August of that year, Pierre wrote to Marie in Switzerland, pressing her to return to Paris. Marie was spending the summer with her father's relatives at Squanica in the Carpathians after a year of magnetic steel measurements. The letter traveled from Paris to follow her there. Of all his dreams, he wrote, only one was legitimate. Here it is, in his own hand. Read it once, slowly. Marie and Pierre were married on 26 July 1895 at the City Hall in Sceaux, just south of Paris. There was no religious ceremony. Professor Sklodowski came from Warsaw with Hella for the occasion. Marie wore a navy blue woolen suit and a blue blouse. The only wedding presents mentioned in the record were 2 bicycles, paid for by a cousin, which the couple rode off on for a bicycle honeymoon through the Ile-de-France and later the Auvergne. The marriage was a continuation of the working choice, not a departure from it. Small rooms, no dowry, a shared laboratory around the corner on the Rue Lomond. Chapter 3. The Shed. Irene was born on 12 September 1897, and on 1 November 1904, Marie was officially named Chief of Work under Pierre at 2,400 francs a year, her first Sorbonne salary. The shed on the Rue Lomond has been waiting, a former dissecting room with a leaky glass roof, a bitumen over earth floor, a rusty cast iron stove, and no hoods. The heroic period of our common existence, Marie was later to call it, in the only voice she ever used about that time. Pierre had been named Maître de Conférence at the Sorbonne. Marie had been working as preparatrix under him since the year 1900, and on 25 June 1903, in the students' hall, reached by a twisting hidden staircase, she defended her doctoral thesis, researches on radioactive substances, before examiners Lippmann, Bouty, and Moissan. Bronia, in Paris for the event, dragged her sister to buy a new black silken wool dress, as if to mark the occasion with something grown. Lippmann awarded a doctorate très honorable, then added personally, "In the name of the jury, Madame, I wish to express to you all our congratulations." Marie Sklodowska-Curie became Doctor ès Sciences, only the second woman in the faculty's history to take the degree. The institutional scaffolding that the work would need was, for now, only partly provided. The Curie's workplace was a former dissecting room of the Faculty of Medicine, a wooden shack with a leaky skylight roof, no proper floor, only bitumen over earth. some worn kitchen tables, a blackboard, and a rusty cast-iron stove. In summer, the skylights turned it into a hothouse. In winter, the stove barely warmed 2 steps away. Marie performed the chemical separations in the courtyard, dressed in an old, dust-covered, acid-stained smock, her hair blown by the wind, surrounded by stinging smoke. She treated as many as 20 kilograms of matter at a time, filling the shed with great jars of precipitates and liquids. As the synthesis notes, she did the man's job. Not the public-facing measurement, but the long anonymous fractionation. On the 6th of February, 1898, Marie recorded the temperature of her glassing storeroom as 6.25 degrees centigrade, with 10 exclamation points after the figure, and proceeded to work in it without lead shielding. The exclamation points were Marie's own shorthand for emphasis. The figure was the morning temperature of the room before the rusty stove had warmed more than 2 steps around it. In a glassing corner of the shed that the Curies had partitioned off for the more sensitive electrical measurements. The number is small. It enters the record as the first measurable cost of the work, before the later costs became measurable only in years. In 1896, Henri Becquerel had discovered that uranium salts emitted a radiation that fogged photographic plates through black paper. Marie chose as her doctoral topic these Becquerel uranium rays. She tested every known chemical element and found that thorium compounds also emitted similar radiation, proposing the word radioactivity to describe the property. She tested minerals from the school's collection and found that specimens containing uranium or thorium were far more radioactive than the uranium or thorium content alone could explain. She repeated the measurements 20 times before accepting that an unknown element, far more powerfully radioactive than uranium, must be present in small quantities. In mid-1898, the Curies chose pitchblende, which in its pure state is about 4 times more active than oxide of uranium. On 12 April, Marie presented her first communication to the Academy of Science, announcing the probable presence in pitchblende of a new element with powerful radioactivity. On 18 July, the Joint Curies' Note announced a substance related to bismuth by its analytical properties, proposing the name polonium for the country of one of them. On 26 December, with collaborator G. Beaumont, the second new element was announced in the proceedings, radium. The naming was in part a Polish act. It sat in the same ore alongside the joint work. Pierre abandoned his own study of crystals to work with her in May or June of 1898, beginning an 8-year collaboration that would end only with his death. Through the intercession of Professor Suess and the Vienna Academy of Science, the Austrian government, which owned the state factory at St. Joachimsthal in Bohemia, presented the Curies with a ton of residue. The Curies paying only the transport. The state factory had been extracting uranium from pitchblende for the glazing industry. The radium-rich residue was, to them, waste. When the heavy wagon arrived on the Rue Lomond, Pierre and Marie ran bareheaded into the street in laboratory gowns, Marie cutting open the sacking and plunging both hands into the dull brown ore. Pierre's deliberate burn, 6 square centimeters of lesion on the inside of his forearm, scabbed on day 20, bandaged, still a 1 square centimeter gray wound on day 52. Pierre had strapped the radium to his arm on purpose to see what it would do. The lesion was the first controlled observation of what radiation does to skin. Henri Becquerel's accidental burn came from carrying a tube in his waistcoat pocket when radium was something he had been persuaded by Pierre to carry home after a Royal Institution visit. Becquerel told the Curies, delighted and grumpy at once, "I love it, but I owe it a grudge." The first documented cost, named in 2 hands and a waistcoat in the early years, before anyone knew what the cost would compound to over the next 40. 45 months after the December 1898 announcement, Marie succeeded in preparing a decigram of pure radium chloride. 4 estimations mean atomic weight 225. Radium officially existed. Marie's own characterization, written years later for her autobiographical note. It had taken me almost 4 years to produce the kind of evidence which chemical science demands, that radium is truly a new element. 1 year would probably have been enough for the same purpose, if reasonable means had been at my disposal. By 1902, the family lived at 108 Boulevard Kellerman with old Dr. Eugène Curie, the physician grandfather who had refused to have his sons baptized and who had thrown himself into watching over the 4-year-old Irene. Irene called her mother May. One night at about 9 o'clock, after Irene was asleep, Pierre and Marie walked arm in arm to the shed. In darkness, Marie sat down on a straw-bottomed chair before the glass receivers on shelves and tables, watching the phosphorescent bluish outlines of their radium. Pierre touched her hair lightly. She was to remember forever, the daughter wrote later. This evening of glowworms, this magic. On a Sunday morning at Boulevard Kellerman, late in 1903, Pierre raised with Marie the question of a worldwide patent on the radium extraction process. Marie answered, "It is impossible. It would be contrary to the scientific spirit." Pierre replied, "I think so too," and that evening wrote to the engineers in Buffalo, offering the information freely. The Curies took no copyright and published, without reserve, all the results of our research, as well as the exact processes of the preparation of radium. The discipline named in one line, the discovery was a public gift, not an inheritance. And the next 18 years of Marie's life were a slow elaboration of the same sentence. Chapter 4. The Rue Dauphine. 3 years after the patent refusal came the Nobel. The Curies did not travel to Stockholm. Marie was unwell, and the household could not interrupt teaching in midwinter. The French minister received the diplomas and gold medals in their names. The Nobel entered the budget as currency, not coronation, and the Rue Dauphine is waiting at the end of the chapter's road. On 10 December 1903, the Swedish Academy of Science announced the Nobel Prize in Physics for 1903, split, half to Henri Becquerel, half jointly to Pierre and Marie Curie for their work on radioactivity. The Curies did not travel to Stockholm in midwinter. Marie was unwell, and they could not interrupt teaching, and there was no money left in the household for the journey. The French minister received the diplomas and gold medals in their names. The first acceptance, framed plainly as currency, not coronation. The day after the announcement, Marie wrote to her brother Joseph, "We have been given half of the Nobel Prize. I believe it is about 70,000 francs. For us, it is a huge sum." The Nobel entered the household as a number, not as a triumph. On 2 January 1904, the Nobel check was deposited at the Avenue des Gobelins branch bank. Pierre at last left his teaching post at the School of Physics. Paul Langevin, his former pupil, replaced him. Marie sent a 20,000 Austrian crown loan to the Deluskis for their Zakopane sanatorium. Money she had earned in dollars for the Curies in crowns. The new Sorbonne chair, created for Pierre in early 1904, came with no laboratory. Pierre refused to leave the PCN until the Chamber of Deputies authorized 2 rooms in a courtyard of the Rue Cuvier at a credit of 150,000 francs, much of it absorbed by the building itself. In November 1905, Pierre began his Sorbonne course, separated from his laboratory by a lengthy walk and a single morning's access to the lecture hall. The institutional answer was partial. The Curies had been given a title, but the room where the work was done was still 600 meters away. On Wednesday evenings, the Curies ate dinner at Foyot's restaurant with the Physical Society, the conversation always returning to alpha, beta, and gamma rays. On 22 January 1904, Pierre wrote to his old friend E. Gouy, "The cause is the stupid life which I lead at present. You have seen this sudden infatuation for radium, which has resulted for us in all the advantages of a moment of popularity. I feel myself invaded by a kind of stupor." On 25 July 1905, he wrote again, "It is now more than a year since I have been able to engage in any research, and I have no moment to myself. The texture of the post-Nobel years, exhaustion masked by civility." At Easter 1906, the Curies took several days at their country house at Saint-Rémy-les-Chevreuse. 2 sweet days under a mild sun in the Chevreuse Valley, riding bicycles into the woods of Port Royal, picking violets and periwinkles. Pierre watched Irene chasing butterflies in her shirt and boys' shorts. Pierre murmured to Marie, "Life has been sweet with you, Marie." On the rainy Wednesday evening of 18 April, they returned to Paris. Marie joined Pierre at the laboratory, and they walked arm in arm to Foyot for the traditional dinner of the Physical Society. Last days of a working life, named plainly. Thursday, 19 April, 1906. Pierre attended a luncheon of the Association of Professors at the Hôtel des Sociétés Savantes in the Rue d'Anton, where he supported a plan to limit laboratory accidents, the irony of which would only have struck him later. He left at about 2:30 in the afternoon, shook hands with Jean Perrin, and walked toward the Seine under his big umbrella. Finding his publisher Gauthier Villars closed by a strike, he turned into the Rue Dauphine, a narrow, encumbered old Paris street, and walked behind a closed cab toward the Pont Neuf. At the corner of the Rue Dauphine and the Quai, a heavy wagon loaded with military uniforms, drawn by 2 horses and driven by Louis Manin, emerged from the Pont Neuf at a trot. Pierre stepped out from behind the cab, was surprised by one of the horses, slipped on the wet pavement, and fell beneath the horse's feet. The cart's left rear wheel passed over his head. A doctor later counted 16 bony fragments of the skull. While the body lay at the police station in the Rue des Grands Augustins, Dean Paul Appel and Jean Perrin came to the house at Boulevard Kellermann to tell Marie. Old Dr. Eugène Curie, alone in the house, read the news in their faces and said, "My son is dead." Then repeated bitterly, what was he dreaming of this time? At 6 o'clock, Marie returned, gay and vivid from the laboratory, and was told by Appel in the garden. She repeated in a low voice, "Pierre is dead? Dead? Absolutely dead?" She sent a telegram to Warsaw. Pierre dead result accident, and went to sit in the wet garden. An ambulance brought the body home at 8. Marie locked her bedroom door, lit a great wood fire, and unwrapped a package of Pierre's blood-stained clothing, an hideous mass of clothing, of linen, of dried mud and blackened blood, including fragments of brain caught in the cloth. She cut the coat into pieces and fed them to the flames. Bronia took over the scissors when Marie broke down. The Curies wished a simple interment in the family vault in the little cemetery at Sceaux. There was neither official ceremony nor address, and only his friends accompanied him to his last home. Jacques Curie's tribute ran. He had all the gifts. There were not two like him. The government offered Marie a national pension for the widow and children of Pierre Curie. Marie refused flatly. "I don't want a pension. I am young enough to earn my living and that of my children." On 13 May 1906, the Council of the Faculty of Science unanimously decided to maintain Pierre's chair and confide it to Marie under the title Chargé de Cours, the first time a position in French higher education had been given to a woman at an annual salary of 10,000 francs. The second refusal and the appointment that followed. Chapter 5. The Refusals. The pension was refused. The chair was accepted. On 5 November 1906, in a storm of applause, Marie walked to the chair in the small lecture hall of the Sorbonne and resumed Pierre's last course at the exact sentence where he had stopped. The decision to refuse the pension and to accept the appointment was the discipline's first public working choice after Pierre's death. The rest of the chapter is a sequence of refusals in the same hand. In autumn 1906, Marie also moved with her daughters and Dr. Curie to 6 Rue du Chemin de Fer at Sceaux, near where Pierre had lived and was buried. When the old man offered to leave, fearing he might be in the way, Marie answered in a troubled voice, "If you went away, it would hurt me. But you should choose what you prefer." The old man's reply, "What I prefer, Marie, is to stay with you always." On Monday, 5 November 1906, at 1:30 in the afternoon, Marie Curie walked to the chair in the small lecture hall of the Sorbonne, holding on to the long table loaded with apparatus in a storm of applause. She bowed once, a dry little movement intended as a salute, and, staring straight ahead, resumed Pierre's last course at the exact sentence where he had stopped. The contemporary journalist Octave Belliard wrote from the hall. Where they expected to see a grieving woman, they saw a man, a modest scholar with a forehead of bronze, behind which the stirring thoughts did not let themselves be suspected. The succession, with the widowhood held in one breath. Each morning, Marie met the small cluster of students she dubbed the Soviet, waiting in the vestibule to consult her in passing. She would dispense advice, encouragement, or blunt corrections. She set up the Institute's laboratory teas to celebrate thesis defenses or prizes, with laboratory glasses serving as teacups. Pierre's old friend Paul Langevin, who had replaced Pierre at the School of Physics, was among the Soviets. The friendship would become a scandal in 1911, held here as texture, named honestly but not adjudicated. The Cross of Chevalier of the Legion of Honor was offered to Marie in 1910. She refused it, inspired by the attitude of Pierre Curie, who had refused the same honor in 1903 on the explicit ground that he needed a laboratory, not a decoration. Pierre had written to the minister, "I pray you to thank the minister and to inform him that I do not in the least feel the need of a decoration, but that I do feel the greatest need for a laboratory." Marie held to that line 3 years after his death. The third refusal, named plainly. Within months, Marie allowed herself to be persuaded to stand for election to the Academy of Sciences. Her competitor was Edward Branly, the elderly radio pioneer who had helped Marconi build the first transatlantic signal. On 23 January 1911, the day of the election, the president told the ushers, "Let everybody come in, women excepted." Marie Curie missed election by 1 vote. Branly won by 1. She was not permitted to enter the gallery to hear the count. The institution's refusal, named in 2 sentences, it was the Academy that refused, not she. Shortly after the second Nobel announcement, a hostile press campaign in Paris accused the widowed scientist of impropriety. Marie suffered anonymous threats, was pushed toward physical collapse, and briefly considered suicide before falling gravely ill with a kidney disease that required surgery. The press treatment toggled between calling her the foreign woman and the ambassadress of France, the same 2 registers used on the same story line by line. Defenders included Jean Perrin, Émile Borel, the Curie family's Polish and French circles, and Pierre's brother, Jacques Curie, who lent his name to the cause. The affair itself was a footnote. The press campaign machinery was the beat. Marie hid during recovery under a false name, first at Brunoy, then at Thonon, later with her friend Mrs. Ayrton on the English coast. In December 1911, the Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded Marie Curie the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the isolation of pure radium and the study of its properties, making her the first person to receive 2 Nobel Prizes. She accepted the award, dedicated her lecture to the memory of Pierre Curie, and was accompanied to Stockholm by her sister Bronya and her elder daughter Irene, age 14. The 1911 Chemistry Prize was, in effect, the international scientific community's belated institutional answer to the Academy's January exclusion. The Academy had refused her. The Nobel Committee accepted her. She took the prize. The 2 judgments lived side by side in the same year, the same woman, the same laboratory on the Rue Pierre Curie. The 1907 Institut du Radium project was approved. Marie began lobbying the architects for an elevator and large sunny windows, intending the laboratory to function productively for decades after her own death. She personally picked young plane and lime trees, planted rambler roses in the garden. 2 adjoining buildings would rise in the Rue Pierre Curie, financed jointly by the Sorbonne and the Pasteur Institute at 400,000 gold francs each, with Marie directing the physical radioactivity laboratory and Professor Claude Regaud the biological and Curie therapy laboratory. The discipline's working choice is to build what the state would not and to plant it as if it would outlive you. The discipline is not a saint's patience. It is a working choice, made and remade in the same hand hour after hour, year after year. Here, at the close of the chapter, is the line that holds all of it together. The pension refused, the Legion refused, the Academy's refusal, the Nobel accepted, the laboratory built, the Institute Radium approved, the Polish delegation rebuffed waiting in the next chapter, the War Service improvised waiting in the chapter after that. Marie did not refuse honors because she despised institutions. She refused them because they were the wrong currency. What the work needed was not a decoration, but a chair, a salary, a roof, a gram of radium that the laboratory, not her heirs, would own. Accepting the 1911 Nobel Prize in December of a year that had begun with the Academy's exclusion was her way of keeping the international scientific community on her side against a French establishment that has said no. Each refusal opened a door the next acceptance would walk through. Chapter 6. Warsaw, 1912. In May 1912, a delegation of Polish intellectuals, led by the writer Henryk Sienkiewicz, the Nobel laureate for literature in 1905, invited Marie to leave Paris and direct a new radioactivity laboratory in Warsaw. Popular subscription, the directorship, the homeland she had not seen in 2 decades. The closing movement's first beat begins here. In May 1912, a delegation led by the Polish writer Henryk Sienkiewicz invited Marie to leave Paris and direct a new radioactivity laboratory in Warsaw. Popular subscription, the directorship, the homeland she had not seen in 2 decades. Marie had been away from Warsaw for 21 years by that count, since the day she boarded a 4th-class German rail car with a 4th-class ticket and a single trunk. After painful deliberation, Marie refused. The planned Institut Radium in Paris had at last been approved, and abandoning it would have killed Pierre's long-held dream, the same dream that had produced the line about science being the only legitimate dream. The 6th refusal, named plainly in the same voice that had refused the patent. Marie agreed to direct the Warsaw lab from a distance and placed her assistants Jan Danis and Wertenstein in practical charge so that Polish students could do the early radioactivity work in Polish, and the older institute could later receive a more experienced generation back from Paris. The working choice took the form of a remote direction that honored both the Paris laboratory and the Polish work. She would not leave Paris, but the Polish lab would be led from Paris. The first disciplined distance. It was not the last. For as long as she lived, the Polish work would be led from Paris. She would travel to Warsaw in 1913, 1921, 1925, 1929, 1932, but she would not move there. In 1913, Marie returned to Warsaw while still recovering from the 1911 illness to attend the inauguration of the new radioactivity building. Russian authorities boycotted the ceremonies. Polish audiences gave her a tumultuous reception, and she delivered her first scientific lecture in Polish to a packed hall. During the visit, she addressed Polish audiences in her native tongue, called the Tsarist oppression barbarous, and was honored at a banquet by Polish women where she kissed her old boarding school headmistress, Mile Sikorska, in front of applauding guests. Her niece and namesake would grow up to direct the very institute whose inauguration she was helping to mark. The 1914 Institut du Radium, two adjoining buildings in the Rue Pierre Curie, financed jointly by the Sorbonne and the Pasteur Institute, at 400,000 gold francs each, was finally ready in July 1914, 3 weeks before the war that would test it. Marie Curie was to direct the Physical Radioactivity Laboratory. Professor Claude Rigaud, the Biological and Curie Therapy Laboratory. The entrance stone read, Institut du Radium, Pavillon Curie. Marie personally picked young plane and lime trees, planted rambler roses, and fought the architects to install an elevator and large sunny windows, intending the laboratory to function productively for decades after her own death. The discipline's first substantial administrative answer, a building she had built for the work, not for her name. With her sister Bronia Dluska running the campaign, Marie's Polish supporters organized a Buy a Brick for the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Institute appeal using postcards reproduced with the scientist's handwritten declaration. Polish women of every class sent in their contributions, some as small as a single brick, so that the institute could be built by the same hands it would serve. The handwritten line is the Polish substrate made visible in the same year as the East Room. The patent refusal's voice returns here against the Warsaw delegation's rebuff. The discipline's single sentence held across 20 years and 2 theaters, Paris and Warsaw. Was she refused in 1903, a worldwide patent on the radium process, and was she refused in 1912, the directorship of the Warsaw Laboratory, were the same refusal. The laboratory, not the apartment, was the place to live. The Polish laboratory would come, in its own time, by other hands and other roads, in 1925 and 1932. For now, the chapter closes on the same line with which it opened. Chapter 7. 20 cars, 1 gram. In late August 1914, Marie personally carried the laboratory's gram of radium in a lead-shielded case, weighing 20 kilograms, worth over 1 million francs, by crowded train to Bordeaux. She deposited it in a bank vault there and returned to Paris alone. The wartime materiality of the discipline begins here, with a single case carried across a country at war. In late August 1914, Marie personally carried the laboratory's gram of radium in a lead-shielded case, weighing about 20 kilograms, worth over 1 million francs, by crowded train to Bordeaux. The train was full of retreating French soldiers, the Battle of the Marne being lost and remade in the same weeks. And the case was heavy, and Marie was nearly 50. She deposited it in a bank vault there and returned to Paris alone, the gram of radium staying behind in the care of strangers. The wartime opening. The laboratory's stock of radium exiled to the south, and Marie's stock of radium exiled in her bones, and her laboratory's stock of polished second-year students about to be drafted. Marie equipped about 20 radiological cars, nicknamed the Petites Curie by soldiers, 18 of them personally, the rest through her institute's radiological service. She secured limousines, lent or donated by figures such as the Marquise de Ganay and the Princess Murat. She reserved a flat-nosed gray Renault for her own use, which bore a red cross and a French tricolor on its plates. The fleet, named 20 cars, 20 drivers, 20 field radiologists, all under the discipline of a single working scientist. Marie personally drove the Renault to Amiens, Ypres, and Verdun. She changed tires, cleaned carburetors, ate soldier bread, slept under tents, refused any preferential treatment. At Forges, in April 1915, the Renault overturned into a ditch, burying Marie under her apparatus cases. Bruised but worried chiefly about her radiological plates, she treated her own injuries in private and was back on the road a day or two later. From 1916 through 1918, Marie organized and taught with Irene and Marthe Klein a formal course in radiology at the Radium.Institute in connection with a teaching course for military nurses set up at the Hôpital Edith Cavell. The curriculum covered electricity, X-ray theory, practical manipulation, and anatomy. The course was limited to 6 weeks or 2 months, but the instruction was very intensive, with classes of about 20 students each, occupied throughout the day. Military nurses, whose admission had been approved by their chiefs, Red Cross nurses from their respective societies, and by open call, young girls or young women who, without being nurses, could follow the courses to become radiological manipulatrices in military hospitals. Few had the baccalaureate or brevet supérieur, but many had solid primary or secondary instruction. About 150 trained operators were produced. Marie's own characterization, the métier of manipulatrice in radiology, is perfectly suited to women of middle instruction, provided they have intelligence, activity, and a certain capacity for devotion, indispensable in relations with the sick. By the end of 1918, the radiological service ran about 500 fixed and semi-fixed radiological posts in territorial and army hospitals, about 300 mobile apparatuses on Voitures, sterilization camions, and automobile surgical ambulances, mostly at the front, served by about 400 radiologist physicians, aided and in part replaced by auxiliary personnel, roughly 800 manipulators and 150 manipulatrices. Aggregate wartime figures: about 900,000 wounded examined by X-rays during 1917 and 1918, with a total number of examinations during those 2 years reaching about 1,100,000. One Voiture on the 6th Army Front from June 1915 to January 1917 performed about 10,000 examinations on approximately 7,000 wounded. One German prisoner of war hospital alone absorbed nearly 17,000 examinations. The scale, named plainly, roughly 1 million men examined, mostly by women trained in 6 to 8 week intensive courses, in field hospitals, close enough to the lines that a shell could land in the courtyard. Marie converted her 1911 Swedish Nobel bank balance into French war bonds, knowing they would likely be lost. She handed her personal gold to the Bank of France. She offered her scientific medals for melting. The bank refused to melt the metals, and the offer stands in the record as Marie's stated willingness to convert the visible currency of honor into the working currency of gold. The discipline applied to her own assets. By war's end, Marie was over 50, almost financially broken, surviving on her university salary of 12,000 francs a year and was treated by France as just another war veteran. She was not awarded the Legion of Honor she would have accepted as a soldier, the state's incomplete answer, named in his own words. The army she had built in radiological cars, with woman operators she had trained herself, returned no decoration in 1918. In May 1920, Mrs. William Brown Maloney, editor of a New York magazine and a near invalid since childhood, finally obtained a meeting with Marie at the Institut du Radium. Marie told her that American laboratories held about 50 grams of radium, distributed city by city, while her own laboratory had hardly more than a gram, and she personally owned none of it. Mrs. Maloney asked what Marie most wanted to possess. Marie answered plainly that she needed a gram of radium for her research, but could not afford it at the market price of $100,000 a gram. Within a year, Mrs. Maloney's Marie Curie Radium Committee, with Mrs. William Vaughan Moody, Mrs. Robert G. Meade, Mrs. Nicholas F. Brady, Drs. Robert Abbey and Frances Carter Wood, organized a national subscription among American women and had raised the money for 1 gram of radium. On the night before the White House ceremony, Marie hired a lawyer the same evening to redraft the deed of gift so that the radium legally belonged to her laboratory, not to her private heirs. She signed the supplementary document and refused to delay. The chapter is Spine Beat, named in 2 sentences. A poor girl from Warsaw who had come to Paris on 3 francs a day, on the eve of receiving a gift worth $100,000 a gram, hired a lawyer at midnight to make sure that the gram belonged to the place, not to her. On 20 May 1921, in the East Room of the White House, President Warren G. Harding presented Marie Curie with a lead-lined casket whose contents stood symbolically for the gram of radium. Marie received a gold key on a silken cord and a parchment tied in tricolor ribbon. The real tubes had been left safely in the factory because of their radiation. So, what the president handed her was, in a precise sense, a representation of the gift and the formal deed of the gift itself. Marie refused the Legion of Honor a second time before the American tour. She later arranged for Mrs. Maloney herself to receive the rank of Chevalier. The state received the gram back in a different legal form. It would belong to the laboratory, not to her family. The 7th refusal. The gram of radium given by the women of America would not enrich Marie Curie any more than the patent would have enriched her in 1903. On the return voyage, the gram of radium traveled with Marie in the purser's safe of the Olympic. At Vassar College on 14 May 1921, Marie addressed the women's colleges and the new audience of American women who had funded the gram. Her lines are the closing voice the chapter pays off. It is my earnest desire that some of you should carry on this scientific work. We must not forget that when radium was discovered, no one knew that it would prove useful in hospitals. The work was one of pure science, and radium was not to enrich anyone. Radium is an element. It belongs to all people. 4 years later, the same sentence would return, unchanged, in the spine of the closing movements. Chapter 8. The Closing Movements. In February 1922, the Académie de Médecine elected Marie Curie as a free associate member, the first woman member of any French academy. The institutional late answer returned across 13 years. The closing movements of the spine begin here, and they will not end with her death. In February 1922, the Académie de Médecine elected Marie Curie as a free associate member, with 64 members signing a petition advocating spontaneous election, making her the first woman member of any French academy. 11 years after the Academy of Sciences had refused her by one vote, a different academy had accepted her by spontaneous election, with no campaign on her side. The institutional late answer honored across the chapter's full timeline. She had not lobbied, had not campaigned. She had continued the work. The line between 1911 and 1922 runs through the war service and through 40,000 francs of war bonds she had bought with the Swedish Nobel money and never reclaimed. On 26 December 1923, the 25th anniversary of the discovery of radium, a Sorbonne ceremony honored Marie with President Millerand, Professors Lorentz and Jean Perrin, Dr. Antoine Béclair, and others present. The French Parliament also voted her an annual national pension of 40,000 francs, inheritable by Irene and Eve. Marie accepted the pension, the discipline's one acceptance, named in its exact reason. The line the institution had crossed to get her to accept was that the pension would outlive her and pass to her daughters, paying the family salary she had earned but never taken for herself. 17 years after refusing Pierre's widow's pension, she accepted a national pension whose only difference was that it was inheritable. In 1925, Marie traveled to Warsaw for the laying of the Institute's cornerstone. She was called by President Wojciechowski, a former Paris classmate, who greeted her in the name of the Polish Republic. She laid the second stone herself and was celebrated by Marshal Pilsudski and the universities as the first lady-in-waiting of our gracious sovereign, the Polish Republic, a paradoxical title that Marie accepted in silence, knowing she had refused the equivalent her own country had offered. In 1926, Irene Curie announced her engagement to Frédéric Joliot, the most high-spirited of the Institut du Radium researchers, an engineer-physicist she had first met at the Institute. The marriage bonded Marie to a second collaborator, in addition to her daughter. The Joliot Curies came to lunch 4 times a week and lived within earshot of the laboratory bench. The family and laboratory texture, 8 years after Pierre's death, rebuilt in the form of a daily meal. In 1929, Marie again turned to Mrs. Maloney and the American donors, who provided funds for a second gram of radium to be used at Warsaw. In October 1929, Marie crossed to New York a second time, stayed several days at the White House as guest of President Hoover, attended Edison's Jubilee at Dearborn, where she met the 82-year-old inventor, and at St. Lawrence University found a sculptured relief of herself over the entrance door, set in stone by a sculptor she had never met. The discipline extended abroad, where the first gram had been for the Paris laboratory. The second was for the Warsaw one. Both purchased from the same American donors. Both refused for her heirs. Both wrapped into the same working choice. On 29 May 1932, the Warsaw Radium Institute was officially inaugurated in the presence of President Mościcki, Marie Curie, and Professor Raygaud. The building, designed under Bronia Dluska's direction, had already been admitting patients for Curie therapy for several months. Marie's handwritten appeal, My most ardent desire is the creation of an Institute of Radium in Warsaw, posted on 1,000 Polish walls, had paid for the bricks. Bronia, as the founder, on the ground, named plainly, with Marie in the slightly back position she had chosen 20 years earlier on the Warsaw delegation's rebuff. In 1920, doctors told Marie she had a double cataract that would eventually blind her. She revealed the diagnosis only to her 2 daughters and her siblings, and adopted the alias Madame Carré at the oculists to keep the news out of the press. She had carried tubes of radium in her desk drawer at the laboratory. She had occasionally carried a small sample in the pocket of her laboratory coat. The double cataract would be the first major sign of the long cost that radium had begun in the same hand that held it decades earlier. The long cost, first bead, named plainly, the body had begun to repay the discipline in the only currency it knew. 4 operations followed. The first on 18 July 1923, 2 more in March 1924, a fourth in 1930. Marie invented a blind man's technique. Giant lenses, large color marks on instrument dials, prodigious questioning of assistants to reconstruct fine details of apparatus and plates. She concealed her condition from her closest collaborators, refused to halt her work, and after the 4th operation recovered enough sight to resume driving her car and to perform delicate measurements again. The long cost, second beat. The wartime wallet found after Marie's death in 1934 contained, alongside her Service of Radiology identity card, a military automobile permit, 10 special mission orders from the Union of Women of France, and 4 family photographs, 2 empty seed packets labeled officinal rosemary. Rosemary is the herb of remembrance. That a wartime wallet, emptied by years of service, should still carry the empty seed packets is a small detail worth holding without commentary. The long cost's quiet detail, named in 2 seed packets, and the military permits of a woman who had driven herself across a war. In December 1933, an X-ray revealed a gallstone that reminded Marie of her father's death. Her father, Vladislav, had died in May 1902 of gallstone surgery in Warsaw, just before his daughter succeeded in isolating pure radium. He had never known of her Nobel. To avoid a surgery that had killed him, Marie adopted a strict regime and almost at once began the personal projects she had postponed for years. A Sceaux villa, a new Paris apartment for October 1934. The long cost, 4th beat, the multifactorial reading of the death named plainly. By early 1934, Irene and Frederic Joliot-Curie had discovered that bombarding certain light elements, aluminium among them, with alpha particles from radioactive sources produced new radioactive isotopes unknown in nature. The first artificial radioactivity, with foreseeable applications to chemistry, biology, and the industrial production of radium-like materials for cancer therapy. At the Physical Society meeting at which the young couple explained their result, Marie publicly greeted her former assistant, Albert Laborde, and exclaimed, "They talked well, didn't they? We're back again in the fine days of the old laboratory." The discipline's continuity, named in one line, the same line Marie had used about the shed years, the family continuing the work across 2 generations. On a sunny day in late May 1934, while touring the Radium Institute garden, Marie noticed a sickly rambler rose and called her mechanic, Georges, to save it. This was her farewell to the laboratory. She did not leave her bed again. In April and May of that year, she had taken a motoring trip through southern France with Bronya, but the icy cold villa at Cavalier had chilled her. She broke down weeping in Bronya's arms, then recovered, and the sisters parted at the Warsaw train for what proved to be the last time. She had planted that garden herself 15 years earlier, choosing plane trees, lime trees, and rambler roses against the architect's wishes, intending it to function productively for decades. The garden as the long-cost's image, the same woman who had planted it, returning to it once to save a single sickly branch. Sent to the Saint-Selimo Sanatorium in Haute-Savoie, Marie collapsed fainting on the train and was found on arrival to have a fever above 40 degrees Celsius, with white and red blood cell counts falling precipitately. Professor Roch of Geneva, called in from outside, diagnosed aplastic pernicious anemia in its most severe form. Her blood was no longer making the cells her marrow should have made. The closing movement's first beat, named plainly, without melodrama. This is the cost, not a punishment, and it had been accumulating for 40 years. On the morning of 3 July 1934, Marie read the thermometer herself and saw her fever drop. She told Eve, "It wasn't the medicines that made me better. It was the pure air, the altitude." In her final delirium, Marie spoke only of paragraphing, of publications, of laboratory apparatus. Watching a teacup, she asked whether it was done with radium or with mesothorium, then turned her face away from human beings toward the things she had served. The working choice's last words. A scientist, in her last hours, still asking about the radiation source, still measuring, still looking for the right element. At dawn on 4 July 1934, after a heart that had continued to beat for 16 hours past apparent end, Marie Curie died at Saint-Selemos in Haute-Savoie at the age of 66. The death certificate of Dr. Tobe concluded the disease was an aplastic pernicious anemia of rapid, feverish development. The bone marrow did not react, probably because it had been injured by a long accumulation of radiations. On Friday, 6 July 1934, at noon, with no politicians or officials present, and with only relatives, friends, and co-workers in attendance, Marie Curie was buried at the Sceaux Cemetery above Pierre's coffin. Bronya and Joseph Sklodowski cast into the grave a handful of earth brought from Poland. The gravestone received a new line, Mary Curie Sklodowska, 1867 to 1934. A year later, her posthumous treatise, Radioactivité, was added to the Radium Institute library. The discipline was the work. The work was the cost. The cost was the discipline. Hold the line. Do not romanticize it. The radium she had given away took her marrow.